that we will have three parts of discussion in the course of human rights. The first part of our discussion is about the emergence of human rights. Which I will shortly explain how we are going to use the term image rights and human rights. But the first part is about the foundation for the rationales that we are mentioned in the first class. And the second discussion, if you remember, is about the contents of rights. What are the specific contents of human rights as we find them today? The contents of rights as developed or as implemented will be discussed in the first part. What the second part will do is just to discuss the contemporary contents of human rights, and obviously based on international instruments. And most probably out of this international instrument, the HRM, the two covenants on civil political rights and the Organization of Cultural Rights, together considered as what we call the Bill of Rights. And with that we have a number of conventions. But the contents in the second part will concentrate on what we call the Bill of Rights, as we find them today, not as how they emerged, or the contents that emerged centuries before, or even in the 16th, 18th, 19th, and up to 1945. But the content of the second part will be the discussion of human rights as developed after 1945, and focusing on the Bill of Rights. And the third part of our discussion, again, if you remember, will be on the enforcement of rights. How are these rights going to be enforced? What are the mechanisms available for the enforcement of rights? Starting with international organizations and some treaty bodies established by each of the treaties that we are going to look into, or there are some other institutions that deal with the enforcement of human rights. And these are the three parts. And then keep in mind, during all our discussion, that we are discussing any point in relevance to these three parts. The terminology human rights is a recently coined terminology to the concept of rights. Normally, after 1945, in any of the discussions or in any of the writings that we find in pre-1945 period, especially in the 19th century, 18th, 16th, 17th centuries, you don't find what you call the terminology of human rights. Then, when making readings of materials on human rights, the materials that you will concern the emergence of human rights are just described as rights. But in our class discussion, we may use them interchangeably. But when we use them interchangeably, bear in mind that we are referring to rights before 1945, and we are referring to human rights after 1945 for omission. Use of the terminology, but in a class discussion we can interchangeable use. Either it goes to the answers or in the explanations that I use. I may sometimes refer to human rights while discussing even the first century or even 4 centuries before the birth of Christ. But still, remember that we are interchangeably using this concept. And third general point, which guides our discussion, concerning human rights in all of the three parts, is the familiarity with 3 different types of regimes of human rights. The international level, the regional level, and as well as the national level, at an international level, which obviously will be the focus of our discussion, either in the first part, the second part, or even in the third part. Then the second aspect of human rights is what called the regional spectrum of human rights, as developed in various regions, the African system, the European system, or what we call the Inter-American system, and actually there is any kind of Asian or Middle East human rights system. There is sometimes that type of arrangement, but not developed in the literature of human rights. The 3 most important human rights regimes are the African, Inter-American, European system of human rights. So bear in mind that again, there is a second aspect to the discussion of human rights as the regime is there. And the third one, national aspect. Each nation in the world, probably all 190 states, members of the United Nations, all 193 without exception, either authoritarian, democratic, or even any other sort of form of government that we find in the world. There is no single government in the world right now, at least in theory, to the concept and application of human rights. And that's why in many constitutions we find prescriptions of human rights. And some of the constitutions, which of course there are earlier constitutions like the US Constitution, and but there are some constitutions at a later stage, especially after 1945 and after 1948 with the approval of the UDHR, that most of the contents of the UDHR are put as part of our constitutional instrument. And in some countries, if not in their constitutions, they have some what we call internal legislations that clearly prescribe for human rights. Then this is a different and necessary regime that you have to bear in mind. And the importance of national system of protection, I think we will see that one will also be important. And they are sometimes considered as, the most appropriate way of respecting and protecting human rights. Because unlike international treaties, national legislations are binding on the national government. For example, we have a criminal code that makes it a crime to kill someone else. This is one protection of rights, the right to life. Then the criminal code is more easily enforced still than the ICCPR, which Ethiopia is a party, and which guarantees the right to life. That's why national institutions or national systems are even sometimes more important than the regional and the international ones. So throughout all our discussion in all the three parts, bear in mind that three different regimes of human rights, either for the provision of rights or even for the enforcement of rights. Not only provision, but enforcement of rights as well. Another general point, existence and codification of rights. Is there a difference between at least literal term of existence and codification of rights? Especially for lawyers, this must be clear. Is there a difference between existence and codification? What does mean existence? Or how is it existence different from codification? They are of course different. That's why we are discussing more example. But why is there a difference in existence and codification, especially in the discourse of human rights? Let me give you a simple example, which I frequently mention because of its uniqueness. The Child Rights Convention. You are familiar with the Child Rights Convention. How many countries are not party to the CRC? It's considered almost as a universal ratification of all the international human rights instruments. The one that received almost a universal ratification is the CRC, except for 3 countries. Which are these 3 countries? ሶስት ሀገር ብቻ ናቸው ኦልሞስት በተዘመራ ሀገር ሲአርሲውን ፈርሟል። መፈረም ብቻ ሳይሆን ራቲፋይድ። አንዱ ሶማሊያ። Why not Somalia? Why do you think Somalia is not a part of the CRC? Why not Somalia? No effective government since the coming into force of the CRC. CRC የወጣው መቼ? 1989 ሶማሌ አሁን ያደረጋችሁ ከያገባችሁ መቼ ነው? 1991. So since 1991, there is no effective government to ratify the CRC. And second is South Sudan. Why the South Sudan? Because it's a new country, just 2 or 3 years of existence. And even they are considering on ratifying the CRC, they are given a full an official explanation that they are in the process of ratifying the CRC. And the third country is the United States. Here is the question. Does this mean that children in Ethiopia is a party to the CRC. Does this mean that children in Ethiopia have rights, while children in the United States do not have rights? Or put it other ways, does it mean that children in Ethiopia are better off than children in the United States? But what is the implication of children not benefiting the protection of the CRC in the United States? What is the implication? CRC ላይ ያሉትን መብቶች አያገኙም ማለት ነው። Why do you think the United States is not interested in ratifying the Child Rights Convention? ለምን ይመስላል? Possible reason. Possible reason why the United States is not interested at all in ratifying the Child Rights Convention. ከዛ በላይ ለችግር የሚሰጠው መብት አለ። CRC ከሚሰጠው ፕሮቴክሽን በላይ the national system of the United States better protects children than the CRC. That we don't want to have our children a reduced right by ratifying the CRC. And we don't want to sacrifice the national system. Then the message is, rights for gender as we know them exist in the United States, but they are not what? They are not qualified. Then exist ያደርጋል ስንል መብት አለ. But that meant maybe, of course, nationally qualified or not. There are different types of restrictions on the waiver of the child. But at an international level, the rights of the children in the United States are codified at an international level. Then codified to exist are similar, that's the difference. And the difference will be more clear when we discuss, especially the early stage of the development of rights. When there was no process of codification at all. But rights do exist. And this is what I was named at an international level, codification of rights is a codification of rights in general. It's 1945. Because that of it in the just stated like a draft declaration by the League of Nations concerning children and even minority protection provisions, and between 1919 and 1945, between the two world wars, and even labor protections by the ILO, and even what we call multilateral bilateral treaties on the working conditions of the labor market. There were parents that supported it. We will see that in our discussion, but this was supported, not systematically codified at international level. The systematic codification of human rights begins in 1945, with the initial insertion of few articles in the Charter, and then later with having the Charter and its process, and we have now almost a number of treaties, a number of conventions dealing with different aspects of human rights. But the argument is that human rights were codified in 1945, but they emerged much earlier than 1945. They were in existence. What the system did in 1945 was just to pick up and collect the different sorts of human rights from different sources and put them in a code, or what's called a systematically arranged, and to some extent binding instrument. And that's the difference between existence and codification. And again, this will be relevant to our next discussion, which is related with the foundation of rights. The debate that we are going to see between universalism and relativism. Because one of the arguments that the religions provide, human rights are a creation of the West, especially after 1935. This proves to be false when we look into existing rights, even outside the West. But these rights were later modified. and most systematically after 1940. The questions question the relevance of our discussion on foundations. Why do we need to discuss the foundations or rationales? Why don't we simply jump into the discussion of the conference of rights? Now we have a settled and even compiled list of rights at an international level. So why don't you simply say ICCPR on Article 1, right to life and freedom. Why do we need to go back? Even 5-6 centuries before the Bill of Rights. To justify that there existed rights, even before the UDHR. Why do we need to go into discussion of this part? That's the ultimate question that you have to ask in the first slide. Unless there is a purpose to be achieved, then it will be a waste of time and labor to spend 3-4 hours on the discussion of foundations and rationales. Why is our discussion of foundations relevant? Relevant to the course of human rights. Obviously, the content and enforcement, the two parts of our discussion are obvious. But the discussion of the first part, why do we need? Why should we waste our time and discuss with the foundation? Give me at least one alternate purpose that we need to discuss the foundations. Or else it will be a waste of time. Why do you think it will become relevant to discuss the foundations? Please.
Under the protection of human rights in the proxy.
Why do you come there? Because there are two incomparable situations, right? Or what is the purpose of comparison? Let's say they are comparable. Then there was the protection of rights, if there was at all. There was a protection of rights in pre-1945 period and in post-1945 period. And what's the relevance of this comparison? What are you trying to achieve by comparing?
Yes, to develop the protection of human rights.
The first thing was provision. What does it mean provision? To provide the list of rights. To provide the list of rights. And then 1948 UDHR, within 2 years, Fred ተደርጎ ሲያልቅ ከየት አንስተው ነው እነዛ 30 ታይፕ ኦፍ ራይትስ ያስቀመጧቸው? Out of the blue? ከየት አመጧቸው? Where do you think the drafters of the Human Rights Commission in 1946 came up with what's called Universal Declaration of Human Rights with 30 type of human rights? And how did they arrive that there are only 30 rights which are universally applicable? That's the message as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Why not 45? Why not 10? Why not 100? Then what guided them in reaching the decision of 30 human rights as the universal values?
The past.
It's the past. They went back centuries in analyzing what communities in different stages of our history have considered them to be rights. It may be offensive, but it's not offensive. Is there any right to expression? No man expression. ሽንት የመሽናት መብት አለ የለም? ሽንት የመሽናት መብት do you find in any of the 30 different types of rights? Actually, እነዚህ 30 ናቸው ICCPR እና ICCR ነው ብለን ተከትለው የሚመጡ በኋላ this is the development. ሴዳው በሉ CRC በሉ different conventions almost ለእነዚህ 30 መብቶች ነው የሚያወሩት in different languages. Do you find any of the instruments that translation የመሽናትነት ካለው? Do you find in the literature that everyone has the right to expression? No, why not? Why not? Because expression ሰላሳንደኛው መብት ቢሆን ነበር ማለት ነው። They would not have hesitated to make the universal applicable or universally valid rights 30 rather than 30. ወረቀት እንዳያቃቸው አለ 30 ያቆሙ 31 ማለት ቀላል ነበር። The right to express, everyone has the right to expression. The universal application, Article 5 or Article 15, whatever it is. But they never included that provision in the literature. Why do you think so? London. Never in the history of human beings have demanded that they should have the right to expression. Never in any part of our history that communities, societies, or individuals have raised as a concern that they have the right to expression. Then our discussion of the foundations is to look into how the international human rights region after 1945 have come up with certain list of rights. Then it's an inspiration from the past. The right to life, for example, is as old as what? The human existence itself. We will see that point when we come to the station. The right to life existed from the very moment human societies began to live together. The best example will be what? The Ten Commandments. The first commandment in the Ten Commandments is what? Thou shalt not kill. It's these foundations, either historically or philosophically, that provided the platform in deciding what type of rights should be codified at an international level. But this is not the only purpose why we need to discuss the foundations. Why is homosexuality a criminal activity? Homosexual act is a crime under the criminal code. You are familiar with this, huh? Homosexuality is a crime in Ethiopia, but it's not a crime in almost all European countries, and it's not a crime in the United States, except in 50 states, and that's a different scenario, where all the 53 states have the right to make up their own criminal codes. So there are some conservative states and some deeply religious communities in some of the states, and then some of the states have, still, though controversial, homosexuality as a criminal act. Same-sex marriage is prohibited in Ethiopia. Marriages. But it's legal in some part of the United States and in most European countries. Why do you think European states are comfortable in allowing same-sex marriage, for example, or homosexual activity? And why is the Ethiopian government so concerned that it's even looking behind the doors in the bed? Whatever I do in my home, in the beds, how is it a concern to the community? Homosexual act ማለት ነው ማለት ነው። ለምሳሌ homosexual act in the public አስፋልት ላይ አይፈቀድም የሚለው ኢንዲሰንሲ ነው። ራቦት ቢድረስ አይፈቀድም እንኳን homosexual act. Anyway, can I give you a single case, even in Ethiopia, that someone has ever been prosecuted for homosexuality? Do you know of any case? Homosexuality ተከሰሰ ተባረደበት ሰው? Sometimes it's like rape. Rape በብዛት conviction rate ትንሽ ነው። rape በብዛት conviction rate በጣም ነው። አንድ ሰው በፍሬድ ኮሚት የሚደረግበት ፕሮባቢሊቲ በጣም ያነሳ ነው። ናው ሶሳይቲ አሁን ሊሚት ሲቀረጥ ያው ከዱጋር ለምን ነው የሬፕ ኮንቪክሽን ሬቱ በጣም ነው የሚሆነው? ዋና ተናገር ማስረጃ የለም። It's happening where? It's happening where? Inside the home and most probably in most circumstances where? Inside the bedroom. Then, why is the Egyptian society so concerned? What's happening in the bed? መፍቀር አይደለም ኩያን ያለ አለመከልከል ምን አደረገው? ኤፍጂኤም ፊሜል ጄኒታል circumcision. Mutilation is used by whom? Man genital mutilation. Is there any difference between circumcision and mutilation? To mutilate ማለት ነው ማለት ነው ዲክሽነሪ ሚኒንግ ማለት ነው። ዲክሽነሪ ሚኒንግ mutilate ማለት ነው circumcise ማለት it's neutral. Because boys also get circumcised. Your boys circumcision ሲሆን mutilation አይባልም. Why not? Why not? Boys circumcised ይደረጉ mutilation አይባልም። ለምን ነው? Because boys in the West or in Europe also get circumcised. That's why it's not mutilation. But female circumcision is most common where? Most common where? In Africa. Then female circumcision is what? It's mutilation. Mutilation ማለት መቆራረጥ ነው። Pejorative term ነው። አሁን ለምሳሌ circumcision removing of parts of the body now one circumcision. Mutilation ሲሆን ምን ነው? And this is the basic debate that you will be in the next class of our discussion. Universalism versus relativism. The universalism concept maintains that there are similar values everywhere in the world, in all communities, despite cultural differences. And the relativism is there are different values as much as there are different cultures. Then this is and has been the most challenging criticism of human rights since 1945 up to the present day. እስካሁን ድረስ ለሁman rights ትልቁ ቻሌንጅ ተብሎ የሚቀመጠው it's not a dictator government. It's not a dictator government. It's the debate on universalism and relativism. And when you go deep into the discussion of relativism and universalism, you will find the point that both arguments have some kind of relevance, which in 1989 was reflected in the Child Rights Convention. And that's why the Child Rights Convention is an interesting instrument for a number of reasons. One of which is it's a combination of what the regulation of universalism and relativism. Then, this debate, its sources, the source of this debate is the foundation that we are going to discuss, especially the philosophy foundation. Most of the rights that we find in the EDHR are a product of what? The Enlightenment era in the 16th up to 18th century. That's why most argue they reflect on the Western values. And we are not going into this here, but it's just simply to show that the source of all the debates on human rights emerges from the foundations of human rights itself. How it came about, from where it came, and then a number of other issues are the source or the strength for the debates that we find in contemporary human rights setups. And these are at least two reasons, two purposes to achieve while discussing foundations. That human rights are neither the creation of the West, nor did emerge in the Enlightenment period. Because there are a number of proofs to show that in the history of human existence, there was a discussion or a discourse and even an application of rights, even from the ancient pagans, even from the traditional communities, even we look into the major religions of the world. They provide some sort of what we now call the human rights. Though the prescription may not be in the manner that we find in contemporary human rights, there are a number of indications or circumstances that lead to the conclusion that human rights or rights existed as long as special communities, not individuals, communities began to live together, even without the state. And the state that you find in contemporary period is what we call the Westphalian states, created in the 16th century. But before then, there were a number of different types of organizations of the community. Either the religious way, the traditional mechanism, even sometimes in a philosophical adherence, bound together and living together for a long period of time. What bound these communities to live together is a basic foundation for the emergence of rights. Lolosa is the classes in Koyan. At the end of the two classes, the 2-hour class, we don't matter. We don't matter. Contohnya dalam leadership kita. Anak tanam, anak debat mana? Why? Israel memiliki anak Israel conduct anak Israel Israel memiliki anak Israel Jepang mulai juga lalu bersama di kuliah negara kacau mana? Lalu sekarang kuliah negara. We have different opinions, at least we have different opinions. But still we managed to keep our opinions and then pass at the end of the class without having any kind of chaos. Simply the question is, what binds us together for 2 hours? Take yourself out of the community. What binds you together for 2 hours? Lalu orang misalnya terus terus silang orang. Bro, what kind of food? Just for example, make it concrete. What I'm saying, for example.
Class virus as a problem.
Class number? Bagus sama mata? Kelas saya pakai. Nah? Bagus itu mata. What happens? Bicara. Macam bicara? Bicara. Bicara. Oke, bicara. Sudah ada kan? Ahora sale casar y canjamro. Tamari clases, todos mata, ahí está. Mira, ya dirás a chico que me hace. Lekin selam aleykum tohar kadın. የሚከለክል ነገር የለም። አትቻልም። አይ መቻል ማጣው ማስኬንሱ ማጣት ያለ ሰልፈን አንተ ተማሪ ነኝ ተነስቶ ሊመጣን ካለ ባለበት አገር ሲያውቂ ወይ ታኔት ሚሽን ሊሆን ይችላል። ለምን there will be a response ማለት response ከሌለ ግን what my option response ነው ከኔ ግዙፍ ሊሆን ይችላል። አምስት ቦክስ ሊመታኝ አንታላ እንደዚህ ያመጣ ያቻንድን ግን ላንተ አታዋጣ this is one point and remember to us the state of nature where there are rules absolute freedom where everyone is a master unto himself. That's a lie. And if that's a lie, communities cannot live together. That even without rules, communities begin to develop what we call an ethical behavior that allows them to live together. It's a sense of ethics And communities long time ago were concerned on how members of the community will harmoniously live together. That was the key, even philosophical question. In the earlier periods, in the Greek times. And even if you go to Far East, you find a number of philosophies in Hinduism or Jainism that discuss, and their main concern was how individuals can live together. It's not how individuals can live with the king, or it's not how the individual can live in harmony with the state, because there was no state, just communities. Even the time when there were no states, no formal states, there still were communities, and these communities were interested in designing of mechanisms for how members of the community will respect each other. And can you give me one example, even which is in your slide, that communities have, over a period of time, have developed ethical behavior to harmoniously live together? Just give me one example. I'm using this example because I thought most of you are, or at least are familiar with the concept of the commandments. There are a number of examples in this slide. Look, for example, wealth sharing is the basic tenet of which religion? Wealth sharing is a basic tenet of the religion itself. Of all religions, is which religion? Islam. In Muslim again, someone who does not share his wealth is not a worthy Muslim. And does that mean a Muslim? He's not a good Muslim at this time. He's not a good Muslim. Take all the religions in the world. They have basic tenets or prescriptions, what we call prescriptions, that try to find a solution on how individuals can live together, or members of the community can harmoniously live together. What is sharing, for example? One of these Muslim community. Muslim community. Dehlet matfat የሚፈልግ አለ ደህንነት መስላሉ ማለት ነው። ደህንነትን አታውቁች 20-30 በሬውን ማረድ የሚችሉ አንድ በሬ ብቻ አርደው 20 በሬውን ለሌላ የሚሰጡበት ካለ ነው። They cannot live in peace together. አንዱ ትልቅ ሰላ መሬት ወይ አንዱ ወደ ኤክስቴንሽን that's not a good way of religion. My fellow men should at least have, a minimum standard that will make some say that I am comfortable in the community. There was a basic reason why Christianity like wealth sharing, the basic thing that ናልኳችሁ ለሃመ መጽወት ለአንድ ምድር የሚቆጠረው ለአንድ ቦነስ ለሃመ መጽወት እንደ ቦነስ ነው የሚቆጠረው እንጂ እንደ ማንዳት አይደለም ማለት ነው። በግዴታ ማለት ነው። ክርስቲያን ካስፈራራ ነው ማለት ነው። አማት ጎዳት religious tenets from my right knowledge ለለማኝ መስዋዕት መስጠት it's not ግዴታ. It's what? It's a bonus. It's a bonus. It's an accumulation of good activities or observation through accumulate their attention. Finally what? We will come to that point. The final destination of the target is to order to check and much care. One of which is what is target and do more work. But in Muslim, that's not the case. In Muslim, that's not the case. Masjid, bonus arda. Masjid, gideka. The main point here is, communities always have sought mechanisms on how to make sure that individuals can live together with an individual, thereby a harmonious community. Then there is what we call prescription matters, and even sometimes it's not obligatory. The type of conducts that are prescribed by religions, traditional communities are not obligatory, but simply prescriptions. Let's come to this example. 10 commandments, number 1, right? Thou shalt not kill. After that, what? تقدر what's the rationale behind? If you are a Christian, and then one of the things that you have to respect in life is not to take someone else's life, but including your own life, for that matter, including your own life. But at least according to the Ten Commandments, you're not allowed to take another person's life. What is the message? The simple message is, and the commandment that is like after the Quran, thou shalt not kill them after death. That's a simple prescription. That there must be some kind of force that pushes individuals to respect the commandments or the prescription. That's what? A reward for sanction. A reward for sanction. I should be rewarded for observing the prescription, and I should be punished for what? For failing to respect the prescription. That normally in most religions, prescriptions are always followed by what? Followed by either a reward or a sanction. It may not be clearly provided in the instrument that prescribes the acceptable conduct, but it's obvious for members of that community, that there is a reward and a sanction that follows the prescription. And one just example this one. And the question is, in which sense do you think are we discussing that there is a concept of rights in this discussion? What is the concept of rights? Does it say you have the right to life? Does it take the right to life? No. Then what is the right? Our main concern is to look into the foundations of rights, and then if we cannot identify any type of concept of rights for this discussion, then how do we deduce the existence of rights? Remember, we are discussing this one. And we are arguing that rights existed long before even 1945. That the right to life in the EDHR of 1948 is not an innovation of the drafters in the HRC, the US Commission, but it was what? An innovation of past generations, one of which is the point that we have discussed, that we're in the right. Or how can we reconcile that we can take something out of this other right? It simply says at the level, it's prescribing just some kind of duty on an individual that it's unethical, at least it's unethical, to kill someone else. And what is the message of this when we take it to the concept of rights? If there are 10,000 individuals within the community, if 10,000 of these individuals respected this commandment, then what? Then what? Peace and harmony. Everyone happily lives ever after. Everyone lives. አንዱ ሌላውን ካልገደለ በዚህ ከሄድ ከሆነ መሰጁ የሚሞት ሰው አይደለም። የሚሞት ሰው ከሌለ ደግሞ ምንድን ነው? የሮድ ራይትስ which is inherent ይሆናል ሁሉም ሰው ጀምሯል። then the right to live will be an inherent and integral part of the processes. አንዱ ሌላውን የሚገድል ከሆነ ግን there is what? Still, we continue on the duty. That's why out of this duty, emerges what? An implicit right. An implicit right. The right to what? The right to live. The right to live. That's why this we call this as negative prescription of rights. Rights described in a negative way. But the contemporary human rights are described in what way? Positively. You have the right to life. You have the freedom of expression. You have the right to property. These are all positive and direct prescriptions of human rights. The round of this discussion, we can acknowledge, and more of our discussion was mostly on religious theories. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Code of Hammurabi. What has been the Code of Hammurabi? Code of Hammurabi. የሐምራቢ ኮድ ምን የሚል an eye for an eye አይን ያጠፋ አይን ይጠፋል ማለት በሁለት አይን ማየት ወይም ነገር የማየት መብት ያለው ነው። እንደዛ አይነት መብት ተሰጥቷል ሲጀመር መጀመሪያ ማለት ነው። እጅ ቆረጠ እጅ ይቆርጣል ያቆርጣል እንደ Code of Hammurabi አንድ እጅ የቆረጠ ሰው እጁ የሚቆረጠው በማን ነው? በተቆራጭ ዋሪስ at the face value, this seems outrageous, outrageous, because አንድ እጁ ብቻ የተቆረጠ ሰው ሊሆን የነበረው ሁለት የተቆረጠ ይሆናል ማለት ነው። this is nonsense. አንድ ሰው ቢሞት አንድ ሰው ብቻ ሞቶ ሊቀር የነበረው በኮድ ኦፍ ሐምራቢ ስንት ይሆናል ማለት ነው? ሁለት ሰው ይሞታሉ ማለት ነው። እስቲ አሁን ማለት ነው ሬስፔክት ይስጣል ሁለት ሰው ሞታው ነው ሬስፔክት ማለት ግን አትሊስት አንድ ሰው ብቻ ሞቶ ያለ ሁለት ሰው ሊሞት ይደረጋል። this seems to be a flagrant offense. At least the conscience of the contemporary generation. But there was a message behind. What is that message? What is that message? ሐምራቢ እንዳላቸው ንጉስ ማለት ንጉስ ደግሞ የሁሉም ሲቲዝንስ አባት ማለት ነው። ደፍረትሊ እጁ ሊቆረጥ ከነበረበት አንድ ሰው እጁ የተቆረጠው ሰው ሳይሆን መቁረጥ የነበረበት ማን ነው? እንዳላችሁት የሐምራቢ ኤጀንትስ አትሊስት ያው ፎርማል ስትራክቸር ካፕመንት አለውና ግን ማን መሆን ነበረበት? በሐምራቢ ኢንፎርስመንት ኤጀንሲስ የሚባሉት የተደረገ ፎርማል ሊሆኑ ይገባቸዋል ነበሩ። እነዛ ኢንፎርስመንት ኤጀንሲስ ስራቸው ምንድን ነው? ያ ኦፈንደር ይዞ ማስረከብ ነው። እዛ የመቁረጥም የማጥፋትም የመግደልም መብት ማለት ነው። ዋይ የተደረገ ሳትስፋክሽን
ህመሙን ከሱ በላይ የሚሰማው አካል ላይ ነው ይችላል። ራሱ ሲያደርገው ግን የሚያገኘው ማለት ነው ሊረካ ይችላል። በዛ በሪባን
ይችላል ሳይሆን ይረካል በጣም ለዛ ነው አንድ ዘመን ሲገደል ካገደል ሶስ ዘካታ በሚልና what is the message? Go back to our clear discussion. Why don't people kill another person? Number 9 reward and sanctions that. Let's consider about sanction. Sanction what do? Sanction what do? When to him, man? When? I tell you, it's tomorrow. Sargot ወደ ሲሆን የምትሄደው ወደ ሄባና የምትገባው መቼ ነው? ኢንሳን ፊውቸር ታይም ስለ ፍጥረት ቢቀየርና ሰዎች ለዘላለም ነው የሚኖሩት ቢባል ምናልባት ማለት ነው የምትገድም ወደ ሲሆናት ሄድም ማለት ነው። የተፈጥሮ ቢቀየር ፎርቹኔትሊ or unfortunately ማለት ነው። Then again there are various mechanisms of what? In Christianity especially. There are various mechanisms of redemption. So we get to the same level. The side of it. And the message is that he will be redeemed and then he will go to what? Heaven. Then, and then the Ebesho will challenge the man. You can cheat. You can cheat. In an offensive way, man. I think that if you want to get the habits, the Sagamta redeemed the Regana. That's the technique of the religion. Religion, of course, I about technique. And then you can be your answer, and you can be But what is the difference with the word of Hammurabi? What is the difference with the word of Hammurabi?
Immediate sanction. It's immediate sanction.
It's immediate, it's instant. It's what I can do. And the second one. There is no redemption. There is no redemption. That's why different communities, like the community that they handle trying to regulate. And that's how, naturally, punishment is found, redemption in them. The message to the ban. The message to the it's the same conclusion. It's the same conclusion. Though the procedure is different, the conclusion is the same. And the conclusion is what? If there is a prescription, and if there is a sanction, and that sanction is instant, and no possibility of redemption, then what is the emergence of rights? What is the emergence of rights? Again, the principles, commandments, and practice have contributed to the development of modern human rights law. That's why we are discussing about this issue. The commandments themselves, there is principles, the principle of the Quran, for example, or the principle of the Roman law. I think you are all familiar with the Roman law. Roman law. The Justinian courts or the Roman law. No? Roman law. Magna Carta. Anyone familiar with the Magna Carta? Of the 13th century? It has a special relevance, additional relevance than our discussion that we will see that point. But all these numbers of principles set out in various ages and in various communities have assisted at least the drafters of the United China 1946 in coming down what type of rights and how, not only what type of rights, but how they can be enforced. Unfortunately, how they can be enforced is not part of the UNHCR. It's part of the ICCPR of the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. But the message is, it assists them in coming up with a list of provisions that are considered human rights. And again, the mechanism how these rights can be implemented in practice. And that's the relevance of our discussion. But let's add one point concerning the Magna Carta. Anyone familiar with the Magna Carta? Of the 13th century in England? Because it will serve as spring to our next discussion on the period between the 16th and 18th century or the Enlightenment period. And the Magna Carta is considered as one of the foundations for the philosophical thoughts that we find in the 16th century, the 17th and 18th century. What was the main content of the Magna Carta? And for the first time in the history of humankind, the Magna Carta came up with a novel prescription. What was that? That's limiting the powers of the king. It's for the first time in the history of mankind that people have ever thought that they should limit the power of the king. Remember, in Greek philosophy, or even in Roman law, the dominant philosophical discourse was about what? About natural law. Natural law. Where the kings are considered as what? Absolute, without any limitation. That are subject only to God's commands. Or to the dictates of nature. And they are considered as just by them simply being the kings of that specific community. And but the Magna Carta had shown the way that there is a possibility of limiting, and we will see this point when we discuss, especially John Locke, that human rights, as we find them today, any limitations against state power. Many of the traditional societies and the religions, and even the very traditional, generally the discussion of the second slide, their main concern was what? The relationship between individuals. They were not concerned about the state, the relationship between the state and the individual. But the current human rights, its sole concern is what? The relationship between the individual and the state. And that's what's called the vertical relationship. And this idea was born during the philosophical discourse of the 16th century. specifically with Jim Bonney and Thomas Hobbes, arguing on natural law that carries the concept of natural rights. But paradoxically, we will see that word, paradoxically, allowing for the absolute sovereignty of the king, unless the basic tenets of the compact or the social contract are violated by the king. So long as the king keeps his promise on the main tenet of the social contract, then individuals have no rights, or the king is absolute. We will see this point again. But this is the initial theory where you see that rights were framed in the sense of regulating the relationship between an individual and the state, or the king's mitre, but now the state. And this is the clear formulation of human rights as defined in contemporary, either international, regional, or national human rights regimes. Human rights, as we know it today, has no concern at all on how individuals shall live together. It's not a concern of human rights. Unlike this theory that we have discussed, where the main concern was the relationship between individuals. Our human rights system, and I'm the debater requires it's not a concern of human rights. This will be the concern of who? The concern of the government. And that is, and again, we will see this story, what we call the horizontal relationship. An individual, which is a right here, against an individual. But still, ultimately, the responsibility in that state, criminal court, for example, the criminal court doesn't do. In order to sort right, violate the law, the Vatican. But it's a Messiah, then still rights, they are like recognitions, so that we will just take not with an individual. And this concept emerged in the 60th century that I think we should discuss in the next class.